In the beginning, God created the first humans. Their names were Adam and Eve. They were special because they were made by God himself. God loved them very much and gave them a beautiful place to live. This place was called the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were different from the animals and plants in the garden. They could think, talk and make choices. God wanted them to take care of the garden and enjoy everything in it. They had a wonderful life filled with peace and joy. God also gave them something very important. He gave them free will. This means they could choose what to do. God wanted them to choose to love him and follow his ways, but he also knew they might make mistakes. Adam and Eve's story is about choices and consequences. It teaches us important lessons about life, love and obedience. Let's explore their story and see what we can learn. God made Adam from the dust of the ground. He breathed life into Adam, and Adam became a living person. God saw that Adam needed a companion, so he decided to create Eve. God made Eve in a special way. He put Adam into a deep sleep and took one of his ribs. From that rib, God made Eve. When Adam woke up, he was very happy to see her. She was the perfect companion for him. Adam and Eve were the first family. They were meant to support each other and work together. God wanted them to live in harmony and take care of the garden. They had everything they needed. God gave Adam and Eve a special job. They were to name all the animals and plants. They were also to take care of the garden and make sure everything was good. They had a big responsibility, but God knew they could handle it. The Garden of Eden was a beautiful place. It had trees with delicious fruits, clear rivers and colourful flowers. Adam and Eve had everything they needed to be happy. They enjoyed the beauty and peace of the garden every day. In the garden, there were all kinds of animals. Adam and Eve named each one. They lived in harmony with the animals, and there was no fear or danger. It was a perfect place where everyone got along. God walked with Adam and Eve in the garden. They could talk to him anytime. He was their friend and guide. They were very close to God and enjoyed his presence. It was a special relationship. God gave them one rule. He told them they could eat from any tree in the garden except one. This was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God warned them that if they ate from this tree, they would surely die. Adam and Eve understood this command. In the middle of the garden, there was a special tree. This was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God told Adam and Eve not to eat its fruit. He wanted to protect them from harm. The tree looked beautiful and its fruit seemed delicious. But Adam and Eve trusted God. They knew he had a good reason for his command. They enjoyed all the other fruits and didn't think much about the forbidden tree. One day a serpent came to Eve. The serpent was very clever. It started talking to Eve and asked her about the forbidden tree. Eve told the serpent about God's command. She said they should not eat or even touch the fruit or they would die. The serpent tried to make Eve doubt God's words. It said, "You will not surely die. God knows that when you eat the fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The serpent's words made Eve curious. Eve listened to the serpent. She looked at the fruit again. It seemed more tempting now. She thought about what the serpent said. Could it be true? She wondered if the fruit would really make her wise like God. Eve made a choice. She decided to eat the fruit. She took a bite and then gave some to Adam. Adam also ate the fruit. In that moment, everything changed. They realized they had disobeyed God. Their eyes were opened just like the serpent said, but it was not what they expected. They felt ashamed and realized they were naked. They quickly made clothes from fig leaves to cover themselves. God came to walk with them in the garden, but Adam and Eve hid. They were afraid because they knew they had done wrong. God called out to them, asking where they were. They finally came out and told God what happened. God asked Adam and Eve why they had eaten the fruit. Adam blamed Eve and Eve blamed the serpent, but God knew they had made their own choices. They had disobeyed his command. God was sad because he loved them. He knew they would now face many difficulties. Their disobedience brought sin into the world. This was the beginning of pain, suffering, and death. Adam and Eve had to leave the beautiful Garden of Eden. It was a hard consequence, but it was necessary. They could no longer live in the perfect place God had made for them. They had to work hard and face many challenges. Even though they made a big mistake, God still loved them. He provided for them and helped them. He promised that one day he would send someone to save them from their sins. This was a message of hope. Section 7. Immediate consequences. After eating the fruit, Adam and Eve felt a change. They experienced shame for the first time. They realized they were naked and felt embarrassed. They made clothes from fig leaves to cover themselves. When God came to the garden, Adam and Eve hid. They were afraid to face him. They knew they had disobeyed his command. God called out to them, and they finally came out of hiding. God asked them what happened. Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent. But God knew they were responsible for their actions. They had to face the consequences of their choices. God told them they had to leave the Garden of Eden. It was a sad moment. The garden was a place of peace and joy. Now, they had to live in a world with pain and suffering. But God did not abandon them. He still cared for them and provided for their needs. Section 8. God's response. God was sad because he loved Adam and Eve. He knew they would face many hardships, but he also knew they needed to learn from their mistakes. God had a plan to help them and all people in the future. God told the serpent it would be cursed. It would crawl on its belly and eat dust. There would be enmity between the serpent and humans. This was the beginning of the struggle between good and evil. God told Eve she would experience pain in childbirth. She would also have a desire for her husband, and he would rule over her. This was a consequence of her disobedience. Life would be harder for her now. God told Adam he would have to work hard to get food. The ground would produce thorns and thistles. He would have to toil all his life. This was a consequence of his disobedience. Life would be a struggle. Section 9. The punishments. God gave the serpent, Eve and Adam specific punishments. The serpent would crawl on its belly and be hated by humans. Eve would have pain in childbirth and be ruled by her husband. Adam would have to work hard to get food from the ground. These punishments were not meant to be cruel. They were consequences of their actions. God wanted them to understand the seriousness of their disobedience. He wanted them to learn and grow from their mistakes. Even though they had to leave the Garden of Eden, God did not abandon them. He still loved them and provided for their needs. He gave them clothes made from animal skins to keep them warm. God also gave them hope. He promised that one day he would send someone to save them from their sins. This promise gave them hope for the future. It was a message of redemption and love. Section 10. Lessons learned. The story of Adam and Eve teaches us many lessons. It shows the importance of obedience and the consequences of disobedience. It reminds us that our choices have consequences and we need to think carefully about our actions. It also teaches us about temptation. The serpent tempted Eve, and she made a wrong choice. We need to be careful and avoid situations that can lead us to make bad decisions. We should always seek God's guidance. Even when we make mistakes, there is hope. God still loves us and wants to help us. He provides for our needs and gives us a chance to learn and grow. We can always turn to Him for forgiveness and guidance.